start with a prayer?
Yes.
All right, then I'd like to lead with a prayer that's known as Yenge Hatam, and it's very appropriate once I tell you the meaning for it, for today's topic. So I'll lead and you follow if you don't mind. Shall we go?
Yeah.
Yenge Hatam. You can repeat after me. Yenge Hatam. Everybody is muted.
Everybody is muted.
Yeah, okay. Yes, Nepaiti.
Yes, Nepaiti.
Wangho Mazdao. Ahuro Vaeta. Ashat Hacha. Yang Hamcha. Tanscha. Taoscha. Yazamaide. Hashem Bahu Vestemasti Ustasti Ustamai. Yatashai Vahistai Hashem. This prayer is appropriate, as I said, for this particular topic, because the meaning is we praise those men and women from amongst the living whose actions are good and whose goodness is judged by the righteous Ahura Mazda. This is a translation by T.R. Setna in his book, The Yashts. Leading with that, I want to let you know that my research has been done on the Gathas by the translation by Stanley Ensler and by Eroj Taraporwala. These are two scholars who I tend to follow a lot because they give a rounded meaning to the several translations of Gathas that we have. And between the two of them, they cover stuff pretty well. Also, I discussed this topic with Jahan Bagli, whom as I said, I refer to as my walking encyclopedia of religion. And Tanya knows the process I follow. Normally, I give a little presentation of about 15-20 minutes in the beginning on the topic, and it's followed by open discussion. The format is very easy and not rigid. So anybody, as far as the moderators are concerned, anybody who wishes to jump in and ask a question or offer an opinion, they put their hands up and you'll have the fun task of saying, okay, you go first. Okay? That's the way we shall go about it. We're talking about how Zoroastrians can tackle discrimination. And if you don't mind, I'll replace the word Zoroastrians with Zortushdis, which is the original phrase. Zoroastrians is the Greek version of the name, Zarathustra. So the topic is how Zortushdis can tackle discrimination. Now, discrimination arises from, personal prejudice. There is an ignorance, and ignorance creates false sense of pride. Prejudice springs from a false sense of pride, and in pride in one's ethnic origin, in religion, in status, in appearance, in a lot of useless little clutter, which causes a person to get all puffed up about his or her importance or his or her superiority over another set of people. This is a dangerous path, and this is where most conflict takes place. When people feel superior to someone else, and they feel that they can only do well if they put somebody down. There are a lot of people in the world who cannot feel good unless they put somebody down. Those are insecure people. And insecure people are all over the world, including our own beautiful community. So there are, as I said, prejudice and pride and discrimination come in many, many shades. There are lighter shades where it's more a discrimination of, what's the word I'm looking for? Of ignoring things, of letting things go and not doing anything about it. A lot of that happened in the beginning of the Second World War. The world ignored the threat of Nazi Hitler Germany. And the results were absolutely devastating for millions and millions of people. So that's a prejudice of neglect or discrimination of neglect. Then there is also very harmful discrimination. Again, we're coming back to the Nazi Germany thing, where people were absolutely physically harming other people in the stupid belief that they were superior to them. This is the more harmful form of discrimination. We just saw it recently in the beating up of Floyd. I mean, that kind of discrimination that your life doesn't matter to me. You're not important. I'm better than you. I'm white, you're black. That is the more aggressive, harmful form of discrimination. Where do we Parsis fall in that? And I can use the word Parsi or Zortushdi. Most likely we should say Zortushdis because Iranis are not Parsis, but they are Zortushdis. We have this strain of discrimination, which is less aggressive than the others, but it's there nevertheless. And it's harmful, and it is harmful to the people who are being discriminated against. Just recently, I read a book, or not a book, a paper. It's the paper is called Descent-Based Discrimination in the Parsi Community. And it's written by Malcolm Katrak and Aditya Manubarwala. Both of them, Malcolm's a last year final year student, at least he was when he wrote this paper, final year student of law in University of Mumbai. And Aditya is a penultimate, second last year law student also. Very nice paper. It was all about discriminating against the Khandyas. Now, those of you who don't know what Khandyas are the pallbearers. They are the people who carry the dead body to the Tower of Silence in Mumbai for the final journey and leave that body up there open to the vultures. This is an important function, but with our Zortushdi dictums and beliefs that a dead body is the worst form of nasho, or the worst form of where the evil finally tries to grab the soul of the dead. And those who touch a dead body are in danger of being attacked by this evil. So it's like a COVID-19 of 3,500 years ago, where idea was only those who are specifically trained to do this will touch the dead body. And after that, when they've finished their job, they're supposed to go through a purifying Barishnum ceremony, a 9-day bath, which priests take these days. Priests take a 9-day bath before they take their priesthood, Nawar ceremony. And those of you who are Nawars and Mobids will know what I'm talking about. That purification is very high. It is not just physical purification, but a high degree of mental purification involved in that. So these Khandyas go through that before they can, well, every time that they perform their duties. At least that's the theory behind it. I'm not fully aware of what they actually do now in these days, not been back to India for many, many years. Why I'm saying all this is that they are looked down upon by the community based strictly on the religious belief that they've been handling dead bodies, so they are unclean. And they are being treated as almost untouchables. And in India, untouchables is a whole caste in itself. Well, they are performing a very important function for our final journey. And then to be picked upon as, oh, you will live separately, you will not attend the fire temple, you cannot go into holy places. They are doing the most holy task of all, giving the body the final send-off. But we Parsis and Zortushdis have formed this habit of picking up a dogma or picking up a certain ritual and then hanging on to it for dear life without remembering why it was created in the first place. There's a big danger in when you pick on a ritual don't know the meaning of it, don't know why it originated, and yet you go about performing it diligently and getting mad at people who go one step different from that particular ritual. The danger in that is, if you don't know what you're performing, if you don't know why you're performing a certain ritual or a practice, then you're blindly following something without knowing the beautiful meaning behind it. The other danger is, people say, oh, this ritual is outdated. Let's get rid of it. That's the other danger, because you don't know why it was formed in the first place. You're throwing away something that may be very, very useful, very, very precious in some manner. I'll give you an example of this. The Jewish people will not eat meat and dairy at the same time. They will eat dairy separately and they'll eat meat separately, but they will not eat meat and dairy together. They will not even have the same vessels for cooking meat and dairy products. I asked my Jewish friends in Montreal, this is quite a few years back, why is it that you don't have meat and dairy together? Oh, I don't know, but we've been doing it all this time. None of them knew the meaning behind this particular injunction. So, of course, I picked up the phone and called my walking encyclopedia, John Bugley. I said, what, do you know why it is? He said, give me a few minutes, I'll call you back. And he did. He called me back and he said, in Deuteronomy, it says, thou shalt not cook the calf in its mother's milk, which was a pagan practice. And I think it was probably Moses who guided the people this way, that, okay, it's wrong to cook the calf in its mother's milk. Some kind of a pagan ritual. And that became a big thing after that. So now they have separate vessels for cooking meat and separate vessels for cooking dairy. A very good reason, but without understanding it. That's just as an example of what happens when we pick on certain aspects of the religion and use it in an ignorant and a harmful manner very often. Now, when we talk about discrimination in our religion, there's no mention about discrimination. It's not a topic that is covered as such as a discrimination thing. However, what it is everything is inclusive. In our scriptures, it's all about inclusivity. Inclusivity of all Ahura Mazda's creations. We value and we revere all the creations of Ahura Mazda. Now, first of all, amongst human beings, we are all equal, created by Ahura Mazda. So we are supposed to treat each other with respect because we are all creations of Ahura Mazda. We take this one step further. Again, I'll give you another example. We went to the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto. We took the seniors there for an outing. And in the exhibits, the guide took us to the Persian section of the museum, where he showed us some miniatures from the Shahnameh and from Persian artists. They were really tiny miniatures. So the guide then said, here, I'll show you something interesting. He took out his tablet and he expanded the picture on his tablet. And in the picture, it's a picture of nature, nice scene with rocks and shrubs and trees. But in the picture, the rocks, the stones, have faces. And he says, these Persians, they worshipped stones. Of course, one of the people in my group got pretty upset about this thought. And she said, what nonsense. Here, talk to Khushru. He's our priest. He'll show you what it is. He'll tell you what it is. And I explained to the guy that the Persians were not worshipping stones. They were actually respecting all creations of Ahura Mazda. And this is why the stones were shown as having faces, that they are also of some value. That's just as an aside, but as an example that in Zoroastrianism, there is a lot of respect for all Ahura Mazda's creation. We got one of the divine attributes, or as we are used to saying, Amesha Spans or Amesha Spentas, is Spenta Aramaiti. And Aramaiti, although that virtue, it's a female virtue and it's known as devotion. Devotion to your prayers, devotion to your fellow human beings, devotion to your religion. But she's also put in charge of the earth. So we value, we respect the earth. Ecology was not a thing in those days. It happened, it was just a way of life. Now ecology is a thing. But in those days, Zoroastrianism had a lot of laws of ecology. You will not harm, you will not pollute the waters, you will not harm the earth. We did not bury our dead because that would pollute the earth. So this was our way of respecting God's creations, Ahura Mazda's creations. So in the Gathas, the prophet only distinguished between people who chose to follow the path of righteousness versus those who did not. It didn't matter the color of their skin, the land they lived in, or their origin, or anything. All that matters was, does he or she follow the path of righteousness as advised by, well, Zarathustra on his inspiration from Ahura Mazda. So he distinguished between those, the people who followed the path of righteousness versus those who did not. However, when he was talking about the path of righteousness, even there, he, in one of the Gathas says, and I will come to that, he mentions that a good man, when he has the power to redeem a wicked person, and if he fails to do so, he becomes in a way the person who encourages evil and himself gets ensnared in this evil thing. So if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. This is Tara Porwala's notes on this particular Gatha. And for those of you interested, it was the Yasna 46, verse 6. In Tara Porwala's translation, in the notes, he mentions this thing about how it is our duty to correct a situation, even if by protecting ourselves, that we don't become wicked when we mingle with the wicked, but at least if we can try to educate them and correct them, then we are doing the right thing. And we're doing the wrong thing if we don't try to correct them or educate them. This brings us to the topic of discrimination again. How can zortushdis tackle discrimination? By education. And the word education has many connotations. But in this case, show them the reason, show them the history behind things. Most of this thing comes from ignorance. People who behave like this, the so-called rednecks, are rednecks for a reason. They're totally ignorant. They have a false sense, a false belief of their own importance, but they don't realize that they're no more important than the other person in the eyes of Ahura Mazda, in the eyes of the Creator. But they get puffed up and they walk around saying, oh, he's only black, it doesn't matter. To the extent that in the days of slavery, the poor slaves were being referred to as cattle. They didn't even consider them human. They referred to them as cattle, and to be traded, to be sold and bought at your whim and at whatever you can afford. So this is how the depth of ignorance human beings can descend to is right there, you know. So this is what Zarathustra meant, that it's your duty to educate people, to correct them if they are on the wrong path. We Zortushdis, how can we educate? We are a minor, tiny, tiny speck in the whole ocean of humanity. 150,000 in the whole world. It can pretty much get lost. However, if you realize that in a population of India, where they are talking in billions and not in terms of hundreds of millions, some of the most important positions have been held by zortushdis. So you can have a voice. You can have a voice that travels. You can have a voice that reaches people. And if one person tells two more people, and the two more people tell two more people, you know how it goes. You know, maths are fantastic. Things multiply very fast. So when we do our job and then help the others to do their job, it keeps going and growing exponentially. That's how we can help. That's how we can tackle this discrimination disease, let's call it that. In Yasna 46, verse 12, actually Zarathustra goes so far as to applaud the families of FEZANA. FEZANA was a Turanian, and those of you who have done any reading of the Shahnameh, you'll know that the Turanians and the Iranians were traditionally at war. There's always, all these epics were all about the war between Turan and Iran. And FEZANA, for FEZANA, an enemy, to start becoming a follower of Zarathustra, that was a big thing. So there was, that division was not there when it came to being righteous and not being righteous. He considered his message, Zarathustra considered his message to be universal for all humanity. And this is demonstrated by his statements in the Gathas. And for those of you who are interested again, Yasna 31:3, 31:11, 46:5, 47:6. Example, in 31:3, he says, one of the lines he says is, by means of which I might convert all the living. He doesn't say only in Iran or only in Parsi colony. He's talking about all the living. His message was universal. Marshad Khosrawani, in her thing she did with the Zambi, I think, no. Zambi was, no, it wasn't Zambi, it was.
It was, I believe it was.
Zagni, I think it was. Or was it Zambi? I get
Washington, it was with Washington. Yes.
Washington, then Zambi. She did that, and in that she said, anybody can follow Zartushti principles. Even an atheist can follow Zartushti principles. And that's a beautiful statement. Yes, if you're righteous, it doesn't mean you, that even if you say you don't believe in God, but if you follow the righteous path, then you're following the path of Zarathustra's teachings. She was challenged on that. I know, I watched that thing and it was very interesting, but that's a fact. So here he says, if you, Insler, for example, Stanley Insler, in his introduction to the Gathas, in the last paragraph he says, and I quote, if the world is to be saved, this can only happen if man responds to man in accordance with those lofty principles which God founded and represents, and which man must uphold to determination, in determination and spirit. The short meaning of that is that if we cooperate with each other, human beings to human beings, then we uphold the principles that are being handed down to us by Ahura Mazda through Zarathustra. In our prayers, we also affirm the equality of all human beings. This Yangya Hatam meaning is we praise those men and women from among the living whose actions are good and whose goodness is judged by the righteous Ahura Mazda. Men and women. And we discriminate, men discriminate against women. There is that also. Women cannot become priests. Why? And then we go to a whole new topic of why they cannot become priests. But just suffice it to say, in Asho Zarathustra's vocabulary, there was no difference. They were both equally important for his mission and for life on earth. And in another prayer, we refer to Ahura Mazda as you benefactor of humanity and of the races of mankind. All human beings, in other words. This passage is from a Baj passage in the Atas Nyayas, where those who are Mobids will know when we say Ahura Mazda Khodai, Avazuni e Mardum Mardum Sardagan, benefactor of all human beings. In the Satum prayers, which now we are entering the Mukta days and we do the Satum prayers, we pray for the Fravashis of people of other lands all over the world. We pray for the spirits of all who have passed on, not just necessarily those living in Parsi colony or in Iran or Bombay or something like that, not only the Parsis or Iranis. We pray for the Fravashis of everybody. So it's universal. So in other words, when there are no specific injunctions against prejudice or discrimination or racism per se, we are taught to acknowledge the universality of all human beings. A classic example of that was the cylinder of Cyrus. That is considered to be the oldest declaration of human rights. Cyrus was a very smart ruler. He ruled 28 countries. It's difficult to get all of them to follow your religion. You've got other problems. Leave aside asking them to pray all the 5 Bajis, all the 5 Gayes and stuff like that. So he let them practice their religion. He did not impose the Zoroastrian religion on the conquered lands. He was popular because of that. It made his life easy too. He didn't have to worry about that part of it. People followed. In fact, he went so far as to, when he conquered Babylon, he went to their temple of Marduk and offered his prayers to Marduk. Now, this is a very smart move on his part. He didn't have to shed blood when he conquered Babylon. He just walked in and they let him in. They were very happy to see him. He was referred to as the Messiah by the Jewish people because he set them free. So he was a classic example of how to treat everybody with respect. We Parsis are very proud of our what's the word I'm talking of? Free thinking and advanced thinking, which is something to be proud of. I'm not saying it's not. However, there is a term which social workers use. It's called virtue signaling, which says, look at how I'm doing all the good for you, unprivileged people. By that very statement, you're making them to be below you or unprivileged. Privilege or human rights is not something to be given or taken or to be earned. It just is. This is not my words. I read it in one of these papers that I read, and it's very, very simple and very straightforward. Human rights cannot be conferred or it cannot be earned. It's there. Human rights exist, period. The other thing was when we went to Iran and we visited Persepolis, we were told by our guides that according to the archaeologists, when we dug up the stuff and they found various artifacts and slabs, they were names of people with their pay scales, which indicated that people who worked there were paid. They were not slaves who built Persepolis. They were paid employees. And that was a big thing, considering that was 2,500 years back. Okay? Now, Zortushdis who remained in Iran were discriminated against for centuries. And they were still regarded, they were just considered as najis. Their rulers called them najis. Najis means unclean, which is kind of a big stretch because Zoroastrianism has a lot of laws of cleanliness. But this, because they didn't belong to the ruling religion, they were kept subdued and suppressed. They went through a whole lot of hell that we Parsis in Bombay and India never had to worry about, because the Indians, the Hindus, were a great, great people who not only welcomed our ancestors to the land there, but then gave them a piece of land to build their own fire temple, to build their own Artashpera. So that speaks a lot for the Hindu way of treating other religions, you know. And in Rashna writers' contemporary Zoroastrians, it's a book. She says that Zortushdis in Iran, although they were treated this way and they were considered to be lower than the low, when it came to matters of trust, the ruling class, the Muslims, trusted the Zortushdis more than they trusted their own people. So a guy who was one of those businessmen traveling away would trust his herd of sheep or lamb or whatever to a Zortushdi, knowing that fellow won't cheat him. So when he comes back, his wealth is still there. They would give a job to Zortushdi tradesmen, plumbers and electricians and whatever, because they knew they wouldn't cheat them. Trust was a big thing, and that the Zortushdis had earned. Now, these are the oppressed people. The Zortushdis were the oppressed people. For 1200 years, they have been oppressed in Iran after being conquered. And what did they do? They didn't go out and burn things. They continued to live their religion in a simple manner, which earned them that grudging respect from the ruling people. I have a great respect for the Zortushdis of Iran for the way they have managed to keep that religion alive in their hearts. Mary Boyce, who went and lived there amongst the Zortushdis, also praised them for that. That is, in a nutshell, is my presentation for this topic. I would like to hear everybody else's opinion on it.
Thank you so much, Khushru Uncle. I appreciate it. I am going to do a Q&A right now, but before we get into it, I just want to do a brief introduction for those who might have missed it so we can get more context on FEZANA Talks as well as yourself, Khushru Uncle. So just to kind of start, FEZANA Talks is a new digital initiative that we launched this year to engage the Zoroastrian community with our youth in particular. And this is in order for us to just discuss topics pertaining to our religion, our diverse culture, and our community. And I highly recommend, if you want to stay up to date for future events, to follow us on Instagram or Facebook. And I'm just going to throw in quickly just some links so that you can stay connected with us. And these talks we facilitate are a platform for people to simply share their thoughts, learn from each other, and also a safe place to have a dialogue. One thing I do need to mention before we go into our Q&A is that FEZANA doesn't hold a stance during these talks, and any stances taken during a session are one's own, not FEZANA's. But our mandate is to create an avenue to have these important discussions like the one we're having today. And we're always going to play a moderating and facilitating role. So just to give some context, today's discussion is one I know many people have been wanting to have for a while now, and one that the OZCF actually hosted recently with really great participation from youth in the Greater Toronto area. And when we posted news about it, I personally got feedback that some people have been wanting to have this discussion for years. And I actually had one person message me saying they've been wanting to have this discussion for decades. So when it comes to discrimination, there's many things that we can talk about. Of course, it's a very big topic, and like an hour doesn't do it justice, of course, but we have to start somewhere, and we want to eventually expand through multiple sessions with different speakers as well. So just so everybody knows, even if we didn't touch upon an aspect of this topic today, doesn't mean we won't in the future. And discrimination against Zoroastrians and Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the diaspora is very real. But before we focus on looking out, we have to first look inwards at ourselves and our community and the discrimination that exists within. And that's what we've been focusing on today's session. And just to kind of introduce Khushru Mirza for those who missed it, he's a trained and practicing Zoroastrian Mabidyar. He was born in Mumbai, India, and he has a Master Mariner's degree from both India and Canada. Khushru served as president of the Zoroastrian Association of Quebec for 4 years, and he's been actively involved with the Zoroastrian community of Montreal for over 40 years, where he initiated and conducted religion classes for children. Khushru is a trained Mabidyar and has been regularly involved in the performance of religious ceremonies, both in Montreal and Toronto. Khushru and his wife, Minnie, now reside in Oakville, Ontario, and he continues to conduct religious discussion groups in Toronto. With that said, I'd love to kind of hop into the Q&A. Thank you again, Khushru Uncle, for this amazing insight. I always enjoy your talks. I know there's a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I'm just going to quickly scroll up. But before I get to that, I do have one question I just wanted to kind of bring up for you to kind of just enlighten on. So recently, we've seen a lot of youth-led initiatives created to engage in taboo conversations, conversations we normally don't hear about. And one is the Instagram page, Decolonizing Zoroastrianism, which aims to deconstruct colonial narratives in our community. And the other is Zoroverse Podcast, whose mission is to tell a narrative that is inclusive and uplifting. What would you say are some pressing issues in our community that both of these initiatives could address?
In terms of inclusivity, as we were talking about, there's a lot of pushback from the so-called traditionalists or orthodox zortushdis, both in India and Iran. I'm saying Iran is not sort of absolved from that one. And to my surprise, even outside of India and Iran, in North America and UK, there is still that pushback against, oh, if you're not born Zoroastrian, that's it, the end. You can't become a Zoroastrian. And who said that? Also, Zarathustra never said that. I just read out the passage where he wants to broadcast this to the world, everywhere. So people take little bits of literature or the scriptures, and in all other faith communities, they then translate it to their own end. And then they will say, no, no, no. We gave a word to Jadiv Rana when we landed in India, in St. John, that we will not convert his people into our faith. Fine, that could have been then, but that was in 900 and something. We are now in 2000 and something. So what was then is not any more valid now. People are not lining up to become Zortushdis. Let's put this straight here, right there. They don't even know who Zortushdis are. But for those who want to practice the Zoroastrian faith, nobody in the world can stop them. So most of the questions I have been asked, even in the last session, by the youth were based on this particular aspect of it. Why do we not admit other people? And it's not ours to admit, first of all. We don't have a right to admit or not admit. It's just anybody can be practicing Zoroastrian faith. As a living example of that is Joseph Peterson, whom I respect a whole lot, and he's got his lovely website, avesta.org. If any of you want any information on the faith, just go into avesta.org. He's got stuff there, helped by Soli Dastur from Florida. It's a beautiful website.
Thank you. So we have a question here. It says, can you please explain why there is gender discrimination for religious duties? Is that not an outmoded interpretation?
You said the word, outmoded. The gender-based, there are two reasons for that. One of the reasons that is cited is, oh, because of the monthly problem, and then they're not cleaning during that period, how can they perform all the ceremonies? Well, even if you allow for that monthly problem interpretation of things, people are very careful. They're very respectful, and they will not do things that will disturb the sanctity of anything. I'm talking of women who are very responsible. Now we got women mobidiars. That was an unheard of thing a few years back, but now we got female mobidiars, and it's for which I applaud the mobids of North America and UK and Iran. As a matter of fact, Mashad, who is a mobidiar, became a mobidiar first in Iran, and then she was given her mobidiar certificate here by the NAMC in North America. The second answer to your question is why? Because I think it's a bit of job security thing. Why are men paid more than women in the workplaces? It's along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Another question, when we prevent the children of Parsi girls from achieving full equality in religious practices, for example, navjots, is that not considered discrimination?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, the first part?
When we prevent the children of Parsi girls from achieving full equality in religious practices such as navjots, is that not considered discrimination?
So you're saying Parsi girls not married to Parsi men?
I think that's what it says. Yeah, so when women
I
marry
would
without-
imagine that. Because
Yeah.
what happens is, for a longest time, if the father is Zortushti, then they perform the navjot. But if the mother is Zortushti and father is not, then they don't perform. And there's a discrimination right there. It's not valid. Oh, and in North America, that has been addressed, and rather successfully. There are now a whole lot of Parsi women not married to Parsi men, whose my own daughter is married to a Catholic, and yet both my grandchildren in Canada their navjot has been performed. Here's an interesting thing. Going back many, 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 many years in India, and this is from a book by Dastuji Dhala. I read this thing that the Sethias, the landowners who used to work on the farms, who had their farms and who had non-Zartushti workers on those farms. Very often their wives would be living in the city, but the Sethias, the landowners, would be living on the farms to manage the farms, etc. They'd have affairs with non-Zartushti women. And when they had children from those women, they wanted to have the navjot performed of those children. There was a big pushback on that, of course, and especially going back to those days. We're talking of 18-something. So they wrote to Iran, to the Mobbeds in Iran, to ask for what is the correct thing? What should we do? Can we perform their navjot of these children? The reply came back, it is your duty to perform the navjot of these children. It is your duty to protect them. And it is on, I got the book right here. It is on Dastuji Dhala's book called, yeah, I've got a lot of his books. This one is Zoroastrian Theology, and it's on pages 324 and 325. So the replies that the Zortushtis in Bombay, or in India rather, got from Iran were very positive, saying, yeah, you have to perform those navjots. The fact that they didn't follow through is because the pushback was much bigger than they had expected, and they just didn't. There was one priest, though, in India who did perform what they call the navjots of those children, and he was the Suji Bodh. He became very unpopular for it. He took a lot of flack for it, but he did perform navjots of non-Zartushti spouses' children. Okay?
Thank you. Another question is, how can we balance the need for retaining our identity as Zoroastrians with the need to accept all as equal?
I don't think it's one or the other. I personally don't think. I think we can enrich. And by that, again, I hold up this one solitary example, but then Joseph Peterson is way above many Zartushtis who were born Zartushtis. His knowledge of the religion is far superior to many of the Parsis who were born Zartushtis, but including some Zoroastrian priests, who I'm sorry to say, they know their prayers very well, but if you go behind that, not a whole lot. So Peterson, on the other hand, I have personally met him during the one of the seminars in Montreal, and he was invited and he gave a beautiful talk where he was born of a Catholic, one Catholic parent and one Protestant parent. And he was kind of confused with all these different things going on in religion. So he was searching for other religions, something that would be more enlightening for him. And he said he looked at Judaism, he looked at Islam, he looked at Buddhism. He did read up on all those things. He's a very intelligent man. He's a chemical engineer. And then he came across a book on Zoroastrianism. And when he read that, he was totally confused. He didn't understand a word of it. That got him more curious about finding out about Zoroastrian religion. And he learned and he learned and he studied. He actually made his own sadra in the prescribed manner, and he made his own kasti, which is a very complicated thing, in a prescribed manner. And that one kasti and one sadra, so he would wear the sadra the whole day and wash it at night, dry it, and wear it again the next day. So he, as I say, is a classic example of how the community got richer by having him. We actually then, after we met him, went home, and my in-laws used to travel to India every second year and bring back a lot of sadras and kastis for us. So we packed 6 brand new sadras in a brown paper bag with a brand new kasti. We took it to him and gave it to him and said, use it in happiness. He was very, very, very thankful for that. And kept up with us. He would correspond with my father-in-law quite regularly. Okay, so in a long answer, I just hope I answered that. Yes, there is, you get enriched, you don't dilute.
No, I think that's great. Thank you. And another question, I really like this question, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to it. It's how should we respond when we ourselves are discriminated against? And I think this could apply both ways, whether it's within the community. I think for now we'll focus on if you're discriminated against within the community.
I think education again, in other words, you know, some people look at education as a negative word, where they say, what are your kids? You're trying to tell us you know more than us? No, no, no. We're trying to tell you something that you don't know. Not because we know more than you, but something that you should know. These are the facts. This is the history behind this thing. Now you judge. In our religion, at all times, human beings have been given the good mind with the power to think, with the power to weigh things and then make their decisions. And when you have that right, you feel responsible for the decision you're going to make, and you'll make the good decision, more often than not. So yes, by enlightening people, you will explain, you will show them that they probably are making an erroneous judgment on certain things, and they can correct their thoughts. Here's a very important thing. Many of our friends have this approach, the boxing glove approach. Or not only our friends, you look at what's going on in the world. When people who are discriminated against, they rise in revolution and start burning things, the message never gets through. All that gets through is that they're angry. But why are they angry? Why this kind of thing was happening to them gets lost in the shuffle. And the white supremacist will use that against them, saying, look at them, they're savages, they're robbing shops. No. If they followed the example of Martin Luther King, who achieved such a lot in such a short life of his. Why? He didn't take up arms against everybody. He just led peaceful marches. He was a powerful orator, there's no doubt about that. Gandhi, another before him, the big classic example, because Mahatma Gandhi freed a nation of multi-million, hundreds of millions of people from the British rulers in a peaceful manner. Yes, they were beaten up by the Brits. They were beaten up. The Dandi March is very famous for that. They were beaten up in Jallianwala Bagh. They were killed, but he did not resort to violence. His followers did not resort to violence, and they achieved their goal. Today, India is the world's largest democracy. And it is from the work of people like Mahatma Gandhi. So all I'm trying to say is, yes, even our little community in Iran, look at their example. They lived their life honestly all the time, followed their principles of Zoroastrian teachings. And by their very simple act, they've earned the respect of many of the ruling class. Today, if I meet a non-Zortushti from Iran, and if he finds out that I'm a Zortushti, oh my God, he just goes overboard saying, oh my God, you are the best people, you're the original Persians. Why? Because of the example set by these people in Iran. The classic example, a lovely example. Violence and boxing gloves are not the answer for that, because as I said, the message gets lost. But when you calmly explain something of what is what, you will see what used to be in Africa before the colonial people moved in and took over. They had their own culture. They had their own worship of nature. They had their own respect for nature. Or the indigenous people here had their own respect for nature. They had their own. In fact, there's something common between the indigenous people and the Zoroastrians. They both respect fire. You know, so there's a way of doing this and a way of screwing it up. And I'm afraid the Black Lives Matter people, not to get political, but I would have advised them if I had that possibility of doing such a thing. I would have said, instead of say Black Lives Matter, because then people pick on that and say every life matters. Instead of that, why don't you just call it Black lives are as important as any other life? I know it's a long title, but something shorter could be found for that. And then nobody has any way of picking holes in that. They are just as important as any other life.
We have another question that's asking about if the religion says anything against systems that perpetuate racism and discrimination. And they're saying they recall reading something in the Gathas where Zarathustra takes aim at dictators and corrupt priests.
Oh,
So,
yes, he took aim at the Kavis and the Karapans. He did that. He called them, which Taraporola translates as the willfully deaf and the willfully blind. Those who can see but won't see, those who can hear but won't hear. Corrupt practices of priests and corrupt practices of rulers was one of the major things that he rebelled against and talked against. But that was nothing discriminatory. That was pure greed. The priests were corrupt because of greed, and the rulers were corrupt because of greed. And they colluded with each other and kept the poor people down, suppressed. But that was pure power, greed for wealth. There was none of the thing that, some of the rulers thought that they were appointed by God. In all cultures you had that, where the ruler thought that he actually was appointed by God and his family was appointed by God. But that's their way of then keeping control over the poorer people. Zarathustra never talked about discrimination like that. He just talked against this corrupt power. That's why the priests were after him. They tried to kill him. And according to the legend and the stories of his life, as an infant, they tried to kill him in many, many ways and didn't succeed because they were threatened by him, as did the time of Herod and Jesus Christ. The massacre of the infants. Newborn babes were killed because he heard that there's a savior amongst them. But that's power, not just discrimination or any such simple thing. It was just pure greed and power.
So alongside Kushra uncle, what do you think will be the consequences if the community continues this discrimination against our own members and those who are practicing the faith, but they don't recognize them as Zoroastrians? What do you think ultimately will be the consequence?
Ultimately, a certain generation will die out. The younger people are more enlightened. Oh yeah, I must say that I'm surprised that some younger people who continue their parents' antiquated thoughts, but I have great faith. I have great faith in the youth. And I know by the very fact that we are having this discussion, that's a very positive thing in itself. We get into trouble if we say one wrong word in front of our grandchildren. They correct us, and in no uncertain terms either. Make us feel foolish. So yeah, I have great faith in the younger people for that they will do the right thing. If I see the friends that my grandchildren have got, and my grandchildren are very fair-skinned because their father is not from India, he's from here, and yet they, in fact, joined the protests for these kind of things. Okay?
Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions from people. They're saying, can you explain why priests have to be from a priestly bloodline? Why can't others become priests? So do you think the priesthood should be open up to those who come from a non-priestly bloodline?
Well, aside from what I think, there is already a movement by some of the priesthood themselves or by the community to start changing that line of thinking so that Bedins, which means the followers of the good faith, Bedin just means that. It doesn't mean anything derogatory. Followers of the good faith are also able to then eventually become priests. The reason is that people are not falling over themselves to send their children to priesthood and priestly schools. They're very poorly paid. So people who become priests have their main line of income is because they are architects and doctors and accountants and lawyers, but they have also done priesthood. They've become nawars because the family were nawars already and they don't want to lose that and they go on and do that. The parents make their children go through this ceremony. And the poor child goes through that ceremony by the age of 10 or 11, and he or she doesn't know any better. In Iran, the original age for Navjot used to be 15, the age of consent, when the child is considered to have reached that maturity where he or she can consent to what he wants to be. He wants to be a Zartushti or not. So, but in India, we brought it down to 7. And, you know, the kid doesn't know what's happening. He just party, good party, that's all. Priesthood, why it's become hereditary? I believe it was in Iran also. I used to think that it's only in India that priesthood was hereditary. But even in Iran, and some explanations that have been given, albeit by priests, is that if it's hereditary, if it's down in your blood, if your whole family is immersed in it, you will observe all the correct laws of purity and you will know what to do correctly. And so you will follow these procedures in the proper manner. I'm not totally sold on that concept. And I've seen priests who swear like the Dickens. I've never seen anybody swear like that, non-priest either, or who will not be as clean as we are supposed to be. But then that's an exception. There are a lot more priests who are very, very conscientious about what they do, and particularly in North America, because here they are all volunteers. In North America, they are volunteers. They give their time freely to people who need certain religious ceremonies done for them. And now there's FEZANA and NAMC have all got together, and there's certain scale of charges that apply if you ask for a priest for some ceremonies. But I know a lot of people even now who won't take the money, who'll take the money and give it in donation back to the organization, to charity. It was considered, a bit of it was job security back in India. Don't forget, I mean, there were wars between priests' clans where one clan infringed upon the territory of another clan. And this was called the Kakalia and the Kagalia war of some kind, where the ruler got involved in it ultimately. Priests were fighting each other because they infringed upon them and their income would be threatened. In Iran, Mashad confirmed this for me. I asked her in the last session. They're only Bedin. Everybody is a Bedin. Nobody is an Osta. Everybody is a Bedin. It's only in India we have this Osta. Means if you're from a priest family, I'm an Osta. Okay. I married a Bedin. And then she, as our priest in Dadar said, oh, you've been promoted. Now you married an Osta. And she was not very happy with that. Anyway, that's just an aside.
So I wanted to get on this topic as well, which is the topic of purity. You know, I hear it a lot. I'm sure a lot of people have heard it about being a pure Zoroastrian, or being like, you know, of a pure race. And I think there's obviously a lot of complexity in that statement. So the question's asking, what are the laws? Are the laws of purity based in the Gathas, or are they antiquated social norms? And if you could just touch a bit more about when people say that, what does that imply, and your opinions on that?
The laws of purity where the gathas are concerned are more the keeping your body clean, because it is your body that you're using to do Aura Mazda's work. So it's Aura Mazda resides in us. The Zoroastrians believe that we, each of us, have a Fravashi. And the Fravashi is that spiritual essence, the divine essence in all creation. So we have Aura Mazda's Fravashi in us. And when we die, that Fravashi never gets corrupted. It goes right back to where it belongs, to Aura Mazda. So it's our duty to keep our body clean. So purity from that point of view is very important. One scholar in Humbach or somebody stated that, you know, the statement, cleanliness is next to godliness. There is a statement, there is a saying there. It says, where Zoroastrians are concerned, cleanliness is godliness. That was his reading of it, how very important it was to keep clean mentally and physically. Now, when you talk about purity of race, that's a lot of nonsense. Because, for one thing, there are only 3 races in the world. Or some people will say there are 5 races in the world. And that's your Caucasian, Negroid, Australasian, and Mongoloid. You know, that's it. They are all man-created anyway, but from features. So, you know, a Negroid feature is essentially such and such. Caucasian features are such and such. And they kind of discriminated or differentiated on that basis. But it's all man-made otherwise. And that was, again, for one race to have superiority over the other from that point of view. Purity of race. In India, we were a very few people who came from Iran in boats. Okay, they didn't all come at once. They came in waves. As they could get away from Iran in boats, they landed on the shores of India. It's the first group that came, got this permission from the local king, and then invited others and others and others, and so we built up. But let's face it, with that kind of a population, although we are very inbred, we only married Parsis for a long time, there must have been a lot of intermarriages. So people who claim about the purity of the race themselves may not be from an unmixed, they must be from an unmixed couple also. It's quite possible. From a mixed couple, I meant to say. Okay.
Thank you. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to give one more question. And if anyone has any more questions, I'll find an avenue for those to be answered later on, whether it's through our social media or via email. So Khushru Uncle, I just want to end off with, like, what are your hopes for Zoroastrians worldwide, in the diaspora, in India? What do you hope, essentially, like even like the next generation, our youth, does to make our community one that we're proud of, one that's inclusive, and one that, you know, looks good not only within our community but in the public view as well? What are your hopes?
The hopes are good, and if you feel that, oh, Parsis are dying out, well, that is a fact. That's the ethnic part of it. But Zortushdis, there are about 1 million people in Tajikistan who claim a Zoroastrian roots. And very often they need the literature. They were given by some people, they've been given the literature. In Kurdistan, they got their currency, where they got Zarathustra on the currency. So as far as the religion is concerned, I think it's pretty safe because of its very simplicity. What killed the religion in Iran and the dynasty, the Yazdazad Shahryar dynasty at the end, and why did people succumb to the Arab invasion and converted to Islam, is because the religion was becoming top heavy. The religion was where the priests used to sit in court with the king. So the division of religion and state wasn't there. And people had it up to here. So Islam at that time was a much simpler philosophy and easy to sell. Also, don't forget, the jizya tax helped it along a lot, because if you were not Islamic, you paid an extra tax. So we lost millions and millions of our forefathers to the jizya tax. And they said it's cheaper to convert. I think the religion will survive and be strong. There are a lot of non-Parsis and non-Zortushdis who have a great respect for the Zoroastrian way of life. And by the very fact that many of the scholars are non-Zoroastrian themselves, but they've written great books on the whole religion. Insler himself, the late Stanley Insler, he had a great respect for the Zoroastrians. We have to be ourselves. We have to follow our teachings of Zarathustra, and by doing that, we set an example. An example is the most powerful teaching tool in the world. And everybody will learn by osmosis after that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kushru Uncle, for your time today, for giving us your insights. And thank you everybody for attending. I'm so impressed by how many people showed up and engaged in such an incredible conversation. At the end of the day, no matter, you know, what people's opinions are, what their beliefs are, I think ultimately we all hope that we can flourish as a community and create a community we're proud to be a part of. And I want to encourage everyone to continue this conversation. For anyone who's starting an initiative, that's amazing. Please contact me. I would love to support it. I would love to, you know, get more eyes on it. So again, I'm just going to share our socials. That's where you can contact me so I can, you know, promote whatever you're doing. Also, if you want to do a FEZANA Talks, also contact us there. We're happy to also, you know, encourage any kind of session, any kind of dialogue that is really important. Thank you. Thank you, Kushru Uncle. Thank you, everybody. If anyone wants to stick around and still chat, happy to do so. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next talks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
There are 77 chats. So if there are questions in that,
yes.
You can kind of, I don't know if you can print them out or whatever to be handled later.
So I've unmuted everybody. I mean, you can go and unmute yourselves if you want to join, because the formal part of the conversation is over. But you know, people can stick around. We can stick around for as long as you want. So you know, it's an open mic, and let's you know, let's kind of get it going if you want to do that.
I'm here if anybody has questions.
Zubin, if you're trying to talk, we can barely hear you. You're either too far from the phone or something's wrong.
And also, if you want to message me in the chat, I can then share if your speaker's not working. So this, the recording will be shared. I'll make sure I share it on our social platforms, so Instagram, Facebook. And if you aren't already, subscribe to FEZANA's newsletters. You'll always get all the up-to-date information there as well. And you can do that just by going on our website, fezana.org.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. I always appreciate people giving their time for this. I know some people are in way different time zones or could be sleeping right now, so I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kushru Uncle and Tanya. That was indeed a really good conversation you all gave. It really feels good to know so much more about the religion. Like being one of the young persons in this group out here, felt really good to hear all those interesting and amazing conversations. Thank you so much.
Nice to have you there. You don't lead any orchestras, do you?
No, but I am a photographer and I am in touch with him, luckily, through one of somebody who gave me his email. And I hopefully look forward to shoot with him soon.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah, I am actually a photographer from India.
I see. Very nice. Where do you live?
I live in Dadar, very close to DPC.
Oh, Parsi colony.
Yeah.
That's where I'm from.
Oh, lovely. Dad chose this name with a very important guideline in mind. So when you take out the meaning of Zubin, it says something that touches the sky in Iranian meaning. So it was really good to know that.
You said you close to DPC. That's the DPYA?
Yeah, I was from DPY itself.
Yeah, because I was the first group to go for my, the Purvis Hall classes. The first class was at the DPYA, and I was part of that when I did my SSC.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
lovely. That's,
Just with the tablecloth.
that's really nice.
Okay, anybody else?
Yep.
Somebody's waving out your hand. Yeah, please go ahead. Sure.
Yes. Hi, Anaita Jasawala here from Nevada, Las Vegas. And Khushru Mirza, this was a very enlightening talk. Would really love to learn more about what the community can do to change the plight of the Khandiyas. Many years ago, I had read a book by Cyrus Mystery, Chronicle of the pallbearers or the corpse bearers. Yes.
Where the man, the priest marries the pallbearer's daughter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. The romance between a layperson and a pallbearer. And I mean, that is life. It is real. So it was a very touching book. Liked it a lot. And well, hello again to another Dadar Parsi community
Hi.
guy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to have you around.
Thank you and goodbye.
Okay, then I think with this we'll end this talk. Thank you, Khushru uncle, for
Thank
your time, and thank you, Tanya, for running it so beautifully. And our next talk should be around the 22nd of August, and it will be an interesting talk about the role of the Iranian population and how Iranian population has gone through a massive reduction over the last 400 or 500 years. And within that, we have stories about, intertwining the role of Manik Jilimji Hataria. This talk will be run by Merburzin Surushian and his son Viraf, and you will find more information about that in our social media channels and other emails and stuff like that. But till then, I don't think we have anything else planned unless we do like one of these pop-ups on Instagram. So thank you, everybody. Wishing you all a happy Shenshai Parsi New Year for those who celebrate, and also all the Mukta days that are going on just now. So we are very happy that you guys are here and supporting FEZANA in this initiative, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arzan.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.